Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me today for episode 9 of Friday Book Bites. And I am thrilled today to be joined by podcaster extraordinaire Dani Vee from Words and Nerds podcast. Hi Dani, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, I love that intro, extraordinaire. And can I tell you, Sandy, I'm never on this side of the interview, so I'm terrified.
Well, I will make it as difficult for you as I possibly can then.
Excellent. Can't wait.
If it's any consolation, every time I do an interview, whether it's live or recorded, I always get incredibly nervous. So it's okay.
I'm just worried about what I might say.
That's okay. That makes it fun, I think.
I apologise in advance. I'll try my hardest.
No need to apologise at all. So as I said, you run a podcast called Words and Nerds, and it is a podcast that covers adult fiction, children's fiction, non-fiction, a whole plethora of different authors that you've had, and this is just a sample here on the screen now. What I wanted to ask you, Dani, was in all of those interviews that you've done, have you come across any universal truths, either about authors or why we write, or anything that kind of is common to all of us?
Wow. First of all, that collage is special. I love it. Thank you for making that.
Okay.
Yeah, look, the good news is there's no one way to write. The bad news is there's no one way to write. So that's it's very interesting speaking to people about their writing process. And I love the answers I get from the question, why do you write? It sounds like a really simple question, but I usually get these really long pauses, and so many people say, no one has ever asked me that. Like, no one's ever asked an author why they write. It's crazy. And look, I've just gotten some beautiful answers, and there's no one universal truth. I guess the closest thing to that is that everyone is trying to make sense of the world, to make sense of themselves. And, you know, especially with children's literature, trying to help kids navigate through so many things that they have to go through as a kid. But, you know, there are also really special reasons why people write. And, you know, for example, some people write to heal. And I've spoken to Corey White, the prettiest horse in the glue factory, and Trent Dalton's Boy Swallows Universe, about childhood trauma and trying to work through that. And then how do you get past that and not let it define you? And so I think writing to heal, or writing as therapy, is such a special reason to write. You know, I spoke to Caro Llewellyn about living with MS and how she navigates her life, and not trying to, you know, these things are a part of you, but they can't define you, because you have to, as hard as it is, get on with your life. So there have been some really special answers, but I think the one to heal is really special.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot. And last week I had Tabitha Bird on Friday Book Bites, and that was definitely part of her process, was healing. Have you had any really crazy answers, like, oh, I was just trying to entertain my budgerigar, or something like that?
I think not crazy answers, but I enjoy speaking to all authors. And as you said before, I've never limited it. I've never just said kid lit or fiction for adults. I wanted to cover everything, because for me...
Just hang on a second. I've noticed that we've got no viewers, and I've got a little exclamation mark next to my Facebook thing. We are not live.
Okay.
YouTube is live, so if anyone's watching on YouTube, I apologise for this. But Facebook seems to have had a problem. Let me just see if I can press the button and fix it.
Technology is a wondrous thing when it works.
Okay. If you are on Facebook watching this, we've had a technical hitch. Hello. You've only missed the introduction music. That's not too bad. We weren't actually live on Facebook, but we are now, according to the green tick next to it. All right. So in case you missed the beginning, welcome to episode 9 of Friday Book Bites, and I'm joined by Dani Vee, who is the creator of the Words and Nerds podcast. And I asked Dani at the top, before I noticed the glitch there, that she interviews such a wide variety of authors, from children's to adults to non-fiction to fiction. And I asked her were there any universal truths that she has discovered along the way. Sorry, Dani, for asking you to repeat yourself.
That's okay. So we talked about many reasons why people write, but the really special reason, which I was talking about, was writing to heal. Like, I think we all write to try and understand ourselves and understand humankind, because we're all just trying our best to navigate the crazy world, particularly the very crazy world we're in now. But I was speaking to Corey White, who wrote The Prettiest Horse in the Glue Factory, and Trent Dalton's, of course, these beautiful book, Boy Swallows Universe, and all about writing to heal and writing to get through the past things that have, we've had to live through and navigate, and not to allow them to define us, but try and write through it. And I spoke to Caro Llewellyn about living with MS and how she navigates that. So there are many special reasons, and I've got a million reasons, how long have we got, and why people write. But I found the healing process, or writing as therapy. Anna Downs was talking about writing, to combat anxiety. And I can definitely relate to that, because that was one of the reasons why I started the podcast.
Right, to conquer your own anxiety?
Yeah. Look, it was a number of reasons why I started the podcast. One was because I wanted to just give back to the community that had given so much to me from a kid, been a book nerd since birth. And so I thought, how can I give back to this community, which has, helped me be a human and helped me be better? Oh, hi, Cassie. Yes, your book's up here. And the other reason is, look, 90% of the time I'm optimistic and I'm ready to take on the world, but there are times in my life where I get this debilitating anxiety where I can't function or get out of bed. And I've learned to accept it. I've learned to just realize that's part of who I am. But part of managing that is channeling that weird energy that lives inside me into something positive like the podcast. So it's my therapy too.
It's a very brave thing, I think, to use any kind of expression like this, whether it's writing the book or creating the podcast or making music, anything with that creative outlet, to expose yourself like that in order to gain that therapy. And I can certainly, relate to this, particularly with my first novel, The Kookaburra Creek Cafe. What Alice goes through is something I have been through, and it was very therapeutic process for me. How do we capture that bravery to then go and do it? Doing podcast, interviewing all those authors, that can't be an easy thing to do.
No, look, and in some parts it was a necessity for me to get out of my own head and to have a hobby that I love. And really, I don't have to leave the house. I can do it at home, which is a double bonus. And so brave maybe, but necessity more. But I still, sometimes I still get really nervous when I'm about to interview someone. And they don't have to be super famous. It can just be someone who I really admire or who I really want to get the best out of. So, and I think that's where my head's at. How can I make this interview? And it's hard because you have to make these connections, these human connections, really fast. At a wedding when you're doing the small talk and you're saying, oh, where do you work and where do you live? We don't have time for that. It's like, what are your deepest, darkest secrets? Tell me. So we seem to connect really fast on the podcast because that's where the conversation heads. We've got 30 minutes. Let's get to it.
That's right. And I've been fortunate enough to be on your podcast twice now. And it's very true. Like, I felt instantly connected with you, and we've never met in person. And yeah, it's like walls just come down, I guess. Now,
I think so too.
Sorry, go. Sorry.
Oh, I just think too, when you have this shared love of literature and the power of literature, it's easy just to jump on because that's all we want to talk about.
That's right. Hence why this changed from being a 15-minute gig to a slightly longer gig, because we can't stop once we start.
Thank goodness.
I've got two comments here from Cassie. One's, I'm going to say flippant, and I don't mind saying that because Cassie is a friend of mine, where she says that she writes to avoid the cleaning. I don't think that's 100% true, Miss Cassie.
Don't we all?
I think there's more to it than that. But she also has a serious comment here. Thank you for sharing about your anxiety. We never have any idea what's happening inside someone's head just by looking at them.
Yeah, and that is so true. And I think because people often, like, they do see or have seen me from what people have told me as very happy and optimistic, and people don't think you have a care in the world. And especially with social media, I'm not going to post a picture of me in bed, crying. I don't think anyone needs to see that. But that's why I find it really important to talk about, because you're right. And you see that all the time when we promote positive and good mental health. We see these were the people who couldn't cope, who took their lives. These were the people who we all thought had it all together. And I think it's accidentally become a bit of a personal crusade in the podcast to talk about these things openly. So maybe, just maybe, if one person listens and says, hey, that's me, there's another side to it, or I can get through this, like, what a gift.
Oh, it absolutely is. And the more we can get that word out there, the better. And I know that I have had some readers contact me via email when they've connected with a personal part of the story, and it's helped them in some way know that they're not alone. And so the more podcasts we have, the more we talk about these things, the more we can connect with these people, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah, and it's funny because when I started the podcast, I really honestly did not want it to be about me. I wanted it to be about the authors. And so I revealed very little about myself. And then I started getting comments about, who are you? And I'm like, oh, like, why would you care? And then I thought, hang on, I'm talking about literature. I'm talking about humanity. Of course they care about who we're listening to. And so I think it was a learning experience for me, and I had to do a bit of a flip around, and I had to become, I guess, a bit more human on the podcast and share a bit more of myself. And it was a little bit scary, A, because I didn't think people cared, and B, because it is revealing, but then I think, it's for the greater good. And I think people like a bit of honesty, a bit of vulnerability, and a bit of failure. I think that's good to show, because we so often don't see that. We only see the shiny book or the edited podcast. We don't see all those, speed humps on the way. Hi, Michelle. I can see you said hello and you love my podcast. Thank you.
Yeah, it's that human connection that we're all looking for. And I think if there is a universal truth for any writer, I think that is what we're looking for when we write. We're looking for that connection, that human connection. And particularly in this day and age where we spend so much of our time online and we don't have that connection in person as much as maybe we did in the past. For me, I think that's probably something that probably most authors would share in common.
And the truth, I think the truth and the raw human self is really important. And I think, I'm guilty of it too. Social media, I post pictures of pretty books and, a selfie with a filter on because I haven't, gotten out of my pajamas since March. So thank you for today. Look, I'm out of my pajamas.
Anytime.
So I think it's important to do all that pretty stuff because that looks great on the podcast and on the Instagram, but people need to see vulnerabilities. And, that's part of the podcast. I had to tell myself you can't worry about failure. Maybe no one will listen. Thankfully, people have. Thank you so much. But maybe an author will say no to you, and you just have to just keep rolling with it and be okay with failure. And can I tell you a story about an author that I love so much, and I ended up getting him on the podcast. So Elliot Pearlman has been my favorite author since decades, right? Every word that he writes in his book, I think, oh my God, he's in my brain. And so I was sort of, I'd done a number of episodes, and I thought, I wonder if he'll speak to me. I thought, if he says no, I'll allow myself to be brokenhearted for 24 hours and then I'll move on. But it so happened the planets aligned. He had a book coming out, and he was very happy to speak to me. And I've since spoken to him twice now, and we've actually become really good friends because we've worked on some stuff at schools together. And it was about being brave, and it was about not worrying about failure. And I'm sure I'm going to get, so many more failures in the future. But hey, imagine if I didn't contact Elliot. He wouldn't have been on my podcast.
Exactly. It's a scary thing to do, but the reward absolutely pays off. We have a question here from Adrian. Are there any common themes you've discovered that have surprised you from talking to so many creatives?
Hi, Adrian. Adrian has been a wonderful, sometimes co-host for the Kidlit episodes. So he's been just such a joy to work with. Don't tell him I said that.
I won't.
Secret. So common themes, talking to so many creatives. Oh, Adrian, why did you give me such a hard question? I think everyone's trying to do better and be good and put good out into the world. And sometimes we don't know how to do that. But I think every author I've spoken to, especially kid-led authors, they're trying to put good into the world, trying to give the kids hope and joy, particularly in these times of a pandemic, you know, especially Victoria doing it so tough right now. We're thinking of you. And I think the universal or the common theme is people are trying to, in any way they can, put more good into the world, however they can, whether it's through joy or hope or making kids laugh or making you think. And I think to answer that question, Adrian, is I think yourself included and all creatives I've spoken to are trying to leave the world in a better place to which they've left it for their kids and just for the greater good. Is that too much of a sappy answer?
No, I think it is a perfect answer, and I think it is absolutely what we need in the world right now. We can't get enough of doing good in the world. I'm just have a couple of just comments from Cheryl, who's joined us. Cheryl got up this morning to finish Banksia Bay. Thank you, Cheryl. And while you're there, Dani, don't move. Cheryl also wants to know which is Cassie's book. Which is, there we go. That's Cassie's book there.
Both great reads. And we had a pajama party when on the podcast and we talked about these books. So that was a fun time.
It was. And in the graphic that I shared just a moment ago, that's the picture down the bottom there of Cassie, Dani and I in our pajama party.
That was when it all began. From that day, I never got out of my pajamas since.
So it's our fault. That's what you're saying.
I'll tell you a totally off-topic story, but because I'm working from home, I'm wearing my slippers like every day. They're the best things in the world. Twice now, can you believe twice? Probably the only times I've ventured out into the world since March. I went outside with my slippers on. I went into public. Is it okay?
I think in this day and age, anything goes at the moment.
I'm struggling getting back into the real world, let me tell you.
Oh, dear. Now, something that you do on your podcast, Dani, is that you have a feedback session as part of your podcast. I was wondering if you can tell us what they are and how often you do them.
Yeah, so this feedback session came out of a really late night Twitter conversation I had with Ben Hobson, and he was smashing out the words and every day updating us about how many thousands of words he wrote. And I was following with such interest. I'd interviewed Ben before and I said, like, how inspiring are you? This is great. Power on, buddy. And it was late at night on Twitter, and this is when I have some of these harebrained ideas when I can't sleep, which is often. And I said, hey, Ben, wouldn't it be cool, instead of just talking about the writing process, wouldn't it be cool to take your zero draft and then another draft and then another draft and really unpack it and talk about it? And I expected him to say, don't be stupid, I'm never sharing my zero draft with you. But he was like, that's a great idea. And so I said, shall we do it? Let's do it. And so he sent me his drafts and we had this great conversation about the evolution of the draft and what had happened to his draft after getting agent feedback and early reader feedback. And it was just such an interesting process as a reader. We were worried that it was going to take the magic out of the finished book, but I think books are so magical in the first place that, you know, I think even if you think that, I mean, Sandy, this might happen for you, you just write one draft and then it turns into a book. I don't know. Is that your process? But between the writing and the beautiful pictures on Instagram of us writing and these beautiful finished books, as you can see behind me, there's a lot of blood, sweat and tears in between that. And I thought, again, trying to get that raw, vulnerable, truthful human into the show, I thought, wow, that would be great. And thank you, Jodie, for loving the session with Ben, because the next thing I was going to say was that we had such positive feedback about it. I said to Ben, no idea. People might hate it. People might think it's stupid. Let's do it anyway. And so much good feedback from it. So I don't want to say how often I'm going to have them because it really depends on how, like, if authors want to do it. I never want to force an author into that space because I think it can be a bit daunting, scary, terrifying. But we have got Michael Pryor lined up for September. He sent us his drafts, and I'm talking to YA author Mark Smith as well about sharing some of his. So there'll be more coming up. But I'm kind of just waiting for people to come to me or feeling it out with people because I don't ever want someone to, feel terrible and cry on my podcast about their drafts.
Absolutely. So between the feedback sessions and the number of interviews that you've done, I bet you've heard every single piece of writing advice that there is going. So I wanted to ask you it's a two-pronged question, which I know are hard because you've got to remember the two prongs. What is the strangest piece of writing advice you've heard an author give, and what's the most common?
Okay, so I think the most common is people being really torn about whether they're a pantser or a planner or a plotter. And I think people think they should be plotters and like, oh, I feel so bad for not plotting. I just wrote this novel out. But I've come to the conclusion that you've just got to do whatever's right for your brain. And whether that's pantsing it or plotting or somewhere in between, I don't think it matters. And I don't think you should feel guilt on either side of that. So I think that's the most common conflict that I've heard. The strangest but also the most beautiful has come from Trent Dalton, who said that he wants to get that raw human on the page. And that's, I think, why his work resonated so much with me. And he said before he sits down, and he says this all the time, so I'm not stealing his thunder, sorry, Trent, that he sits down and thinks about what would happen had he not met his wife, had he not had his children, and sort of gets that really feeling of angst and trauma before he starts. And I said, Trent, that's amazing, terrifying. I hope you're okay, but wow, it works.
Yeah, the more vulnerable we are as writers, I think the more we can connect with our readers. It goes back to what you said at the top of the session today. They're looking for truth, and if you're writing your truth, then that's what connects. So Maya Linnell has joined us, and she said, yes, serious bravery to showcase 0 drafts.
And Maya, I'm taking submissions, so if you want to be brave too, just contact me.
I might have to have a bit more chocolate before I do that.
Some people go, never, love, never doing that. I'm like, that's okay.
You mentioned then plotting and pantsing, and it's PANTS, pantsing. For those of us who aren't in the writing world like Cheryl, what is a pantser and what is a plotter?
First of all, can I say I prefer that spelling much more with a C. It sounds like I'm prancing. I really like that. That's cool. Let's change it. Well, look, Sandy, correct me if I'm wrong. You are the published author here, but plotting is where you would very much plot exactly what's going to happen next in your story. So you're just writing, fleshing out the dot points of beginning to end. And pantsing is going, I think I'm going to write about romance, and I'm just going to write and see where it goes. Sandy, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, it comes from the expression fly by the seat of your pants.
Yeah.
That's where it comes from, Cheryl. So I fall into the pantsing category. I have no idea where I'm going or what I'm doing when I start, and just fingers crossed that it turns out in the end. Now, Cassie's got a very good question for you here.
I'm so in awe of that process.
Of what?
I'm so impressed with your process because I've read your books and they're amazing, and they have all this foreshadowing, and you're like, oh, I just pants them. I'm like,
I mean, you have to go back when you're a pantser. The trouble with pantsing is that it doesn't always come together, and so you've got to go back and write things in and fix things so that it does all tie together. So yeah, it's not an easy way to do it. But Cassie would like to know, have you ever thought about writing a book, and if so, what type of book would it be?
Oh, Cassie, yes, but I always say this, I'm the biggest self-doubter in the world. And now that I've spoken to so many incredible people, I feel like I can never, ever compare to any writer. But yes, I would love to write a book. And, when I was younger, I thought, oh, like I definitely want to write something like Oscar Wilde because, you know, I love the picture of Dorian Gray. But you know what I love now? Crime fiction. Just I can't get enough. Just give me all the crime fiction, all the blood, all the gore, all the cannibals, Jack Keith. Just give me all of that. So I think if I wrote something, it would have to be really gross and keep you up at night. So I don't know. Would you read that, Cassie? Are you up for that?
Well, crime fiction is such a gangbuster at the moment in the Australian literary world. You're onto the right genre. That's for sure.
Great.
Jodie has nominated Maya and Cassie. I'm assuming this is for the zero draft sharing.
I'm in.
Oh dear. And Cassie is, yes, she would definitely read it if you wrote that book.
Oh, you're kind.
So there you go. Now, because you talk to children's authors as well as adult authors, I wanted to ask you, are there anything that they have in common, and what is it that makes them particularly different when you're writing for children and when you're writing for adults?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the similarity is that all trying to help each other navigate through this world. But I think the stakes are higher for kids because, you know, I was thinking about this question before in case it came up, and I was thinking about, you know, what's the difference? And I thought it's hard being a kid. It's really hard being an adult and boring sometimes, but it's really hard being a kid because you're thrown so many things. And imagine kids' brains at the moment with this pandemic, you know, but kids are I feel like they're at home and life's wonderful and they go to school and like, oh, I'm different, or I'm getting bullied, or, you know, all these things are coming at them, you know, school and learning and who am I supposed to be and is it okay to be this and do that? So I think kids' books go that extra step further and try and really help them navigate these tricky things. And what I love about all the kid lit authors I've spoken to is they don't shy away from these difficult, tricky subjects. They don't underestimate their readers and they really value and respect them. And I'm thinking about Tristan Banks's Detention, where he focuses on an asylum seeker. And it's very easy to flick on the news, and we all know what mainstream media thinks of many things, but it's very hard to be prejudiced when you read someone's story, when you hear someone's personal story, their struggles about, you know, being a refugee or that experience. And my dad, his family came to Australia as a refugee. And so I feel like and that's very far removed from me because, you know, I didn't have that life, but I think connecting with that in any way we can is really important. And I'm just trying to think of some other books that deal with really important issues. Oliver Pomervan's book, Don't Follow Vee, talks about social media and the importance of being yourself and not worrying about the likes and not trying to always be picture perfect on Instagram. So they never shy away from these really important issues. But in saying that as well, they're also filled with joy and they're also filled with laughter. Because imagine how much kids need that on a day-to-day basis. Imagine how much kids need that now. They need to escape. And we've talked about this before, Sandy, with Cassie, about the importance of escapism and how sometimes literature is like, oh, that's not literary. Let's not respect whatever text that is. But it's so not true, because escaping is important, because sometimes we need to escape from our brain, escape from our life, escape from not just the pandemic, but, you know, our normal stressful lives that we have. And it's a kind of a breaker for your mental health. And how important is that, you know? Just trying to think of some other kids' books. Alex Miles, her Girl Geeks, fantastic, you know, in trying to promote girls in science and in STEM. And that's really important too, as we get an increasing number of girls in those occupations. And I think and I hope we're leaving the world in these great hands who are accepting of asylum seekers, who are accepting of difference, who understand that marriage equality should have been marriage equality a very long time ago, who accept diversity, you know. And, you know, I'm thinking about Adrienne Beck and Nicole Hayes's book, Little Legends, which talks about diversity and community and family. And I really live in hope that we're leaving the world with our kids in a much better place to probably where it is now. And I think that's owed to literature, an ode to us as you know, Gen X, whatever we are, in trying to change the world through these beautiful kids' books. So I think such long answers I'm giving you, Sandy. I think the difference is tricky, trying to get them to navigate all these things that you go through as a kid, but filling that with joy and hope and laughter. And that's all I want in a book. If a book makes me feel something, I'm in. And that's whether it's laughter, whether it's tears, whether it resonates with me. As long as I'm feeling the feels, give me more.
Exactly. I have a 14-year-old daughter, and I can vouch for the fact that her generation are far more socially aware than my generation ever was. So I am hopeful for the future, like you said, because they're so aware of these issues and they're educated about them too, is the thing. You know, she's teaching me so many things, which I will never say to her.
Isn't that great?
At 14, she doesn't
from each other.
She doesn't need her ego inflated at 14. But she is teaching me things.
Well, I was in the classroom for 17 years. I'm now still in education, but not in the classroom. And I never underestimated the teenagers I taught. You know, I always learnt from them. And the best thing about kids is they're always so full of joy. You know, you're like, oh, serious adult life. And then they just come out with these things and you're like, you're right. I've forgotten how to live with joy. Thank you for reminding me. So, you know, kids are great at doing that. But the same as you said, like my kids are little, so 6 and 7. And ever since day dot, I've just made everything just normal, you know, like marriage equality. Well, of course anyone can marry who they love. And so my 6-year-old, she comes home and says she's marrying her best friend who's a girl and they're having 7 babies. And I'm like, fantastic, let's do this. So, yeah, the new generation, I think, is our hope. And that's a part of that is writing these great children's books that can help instill all these great values.
It is. Now, Michelle has very cheekily preempted my next question, but I'll let her take the limelight for it. And it's actually going to lead into our giveaway today. So I'll pop Michelle's question up. If you could interview any author, dead or alive, that you haven't done yet, is what I'm going to add in, who would it be?
Oh, that's a big question. I have you ticked off many bucket lists. Elliot Pearlman was one of them, and Jackie French and Kate Forsyth were 2 others whose work I'd admired for a really long time, and Peter Goldsworthy. So I've ticked those off. But other ones, I'd love to talk to Tim Winton. I'd love to speak to Margaret Atwood. How great would that be? But dead, I need to speak to Oscar Wilde like for days, and probably Edgar Allan Poe. And maybe just to flip it around a bit, because that's pretty dark, then I'd like to have like a tea party picnic with Jane Austen. Just to balance it out.
Can I come?
Absolutely. After I've talked about blood and guts with Edgar Allan Poe and Oscar Wilde, and we've traumatized each other, I'll have a daytime picnic with Jane Austen. It'll balance things out perfectly.
And we can learn about manners. So this leads me into the giveaway. Now, I do a giveaway nearly every week with this, and I thought we'd change it up this week. And the question that we've just had actually leads in beautifully to it, because somebody that I would love to chat to would be Jojo Moyes. So I've actually got a copy of her latest, The Giver of Stars, to give away today to anyone who asks a question or leaves a comment, either here during the live stream, or if you're watching it back later, that's fine. We'll leave the giveaway open until midnight Saturday night. Jojo is one of my literary heroes, and I haven't actually read The Giver of Stars yet. It's on my very large pile to read, but she's somebody that I would love to sit down and have a chat with.
It's a beautiful cover too. It's lovely.
Isn't it? Isn't it? Okay, so we have a question here from Cheryl, and I think this might be heading towards our last question of the day. Crime fiction, which is what you said you would love to write. Have you read The Nowhere Child and the Wife and the Widow by Christian White? And I'm going to tack on, have you interviewed Christian White?
Yes, and yes, and not yet. So, yes, I have read The Nowhere Child and I absolutely loved it. And I put it down as one of the top crime read books because that twist was just mint. Loved it. I have The Wife and the Widow on my very large, I've got 2 stacks this big to read for the podcast because I'm actually booked out until January. I know, ridiculous. So The Wife and the Widow is coming, and an interview with Christian White about The Wife and the Widow is coming in about 3 weeks. So can't wait. I love his writing. He's amazing.
That's excellent. So I'm just going to call for any last questions now. And while we do that, Dani, and this is perfect time to do it, if you're looking for Dani's podcast or where to find her online, here are all of her details. So in 3 weeks' time, she's got Christian, which will be fantastic. Who else have you got coming up over the next couple of weeks?
Well, this week I uploaded 2 episodes, one with Jay Christoph and Amy Kaufman. Of their, we've got this massive cult following for their beautiful writing. So that was an amazing interview, and I had Nicole Hayes, author, jump in as co-host on that one. So that came out this week. And then this morning I uploaded Gavin Ungthan, cartoonist of Super Sidekicks, and that was an amazing chat, and with my co-host Adrian Beck on that one. Coming up, I have got The Real Pigeon, so I've got Ben McDonald and Wood coming up. I'm just looking at my giant list here because I have a calendar, Sandy, that goes all the way to January. So I'm now racking my brain. I've got Tristan Banks coming up for Knit Boy. I've got Mick Elliott, Squidge Dibley. I've got Rating Normal, so that's looking forward to that one. I've got How to Be Australian. I've got The Silk House with Kate Nunn. There's a lot coming up, and so much of it I can't remember because I'm booked out until January, which I'm happy to be because I really wanted to support authors with all their book cancellations, but it's a lot. So, but it's great. It's a great.
Much better to be busy, though.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And another feedback session, of course, with Ben Hobson and Michael Pryor. So that's coming up too.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Dani. It's been fantastic. I've just seen one question. Oh, hang on. Before I move on to the question, Maya is coming up in September with you. So
she is. Absolutely. I've got her book right here on the big list. I look forward to talking to you. And didn't you say you wanted to do that feedback session with me?
I'm assuming you're talking to Maya right now, not me.
I'm talking to you all of you.
Oh dear, I actually have my draft sitting next to me and it's in such a mess. I'm not sure what we could do with that. But I've got a question for you. What are you reading right now?
Oh, I'm reading Kokomo by it's right here actually. I'm just going to get it, by Victoria Hannon, and it is pretty magnificent, I've got to say. It was recommended to me via a person on Twitter who just loved it, and I really respect his opinion. So I'm interviewing Victoria Hannon soon, and it's pretty remarkable. And the last book I read that blew my mind was Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason, and I've raved on about this on social media, but I stayed up all night finishing it, and I cried for about 50 pages. It was brilliant. So, yeah, that's out in September. What are you reading, Sandy?
I am deep into The Bluffs by Kyle Perry, who is a brand new crime author from Tasmania. And he and I share the same publisher, and she sent me a copy. And I'm hoping to have him on Friday Book Bites sometime in the next couple of weeks. And I'm still quite early on in the novel. And I've got all these theories going on inside my head about what I think's happened and who's done it and all these things. And I'm sure I'm completely wrong, but I can't wait to find out.
Yeah, I've heard good things about that book, actually. I should give him a call too.
Yes. Alrighty. So thank you again for joining me, Dani, and I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend. It's always good to chat about books, and I'm sure that we could continue on for another hour or so, but we will letting people get back to their Friday afternoons, and I'll get ready to do the school pickup. And good luck with the rest of your podcast, and I will see everybody hopefully next week as well. And I'll think about sharing my draft with you, Dani, but I can't promise anything.
There is never any pressure, never, I promise. I'm just joking around. But if you do want to share it, I'd always love to speak to you. Every time I speak to you, it's such a pleasure. And I want to thank you for having me on. And thank you for all the questions. I loved them. And I'm going to watch this back, but I don't think I ruined anything too badly on the live stream. So
no, and you didn't say anything disappointingly. You didn't say anything untoward or controversial. So you let me down, but that's okay.
Next time. I'll do it next time. Thanks, everyone. Stay safe in Victoria. I'm thinking of you.
See you later.